There is almost no pristine nature left in our area. Fields and forests are slowly disappearing, but more and more country houses are being built. They then join together in gardening communities, where the road network expands, reducing the remaining nature to even more insignificant pieces. But if you know the places, you can seclude even in a small forest. It was one of those places that my girlfriend and I went to on a bright spring day. I wanted not just to soak up the sun, but to experience a little adventure. We were given just a few hours for the trip, because we had bought theater tickets for the evening. The choice fell on a small forest, about 3 kilometers in diameter. There were 2 reasons. Firstly, it takes less than half an hour to get there from the city. Secondly, many years ago, when even the city itself did not exist yet, peat mining was carried out in that area. And after that, there was a small lake right in the center of the forest which I saw on a satellite image. It, along with a couple of other similar bodies of water, was called forest lakes in our country. They were mainly famous for the fact that there were no other lakes in the vicinity. Most of the forest lakes had already become the centers of country villages, but ours, judging by satellite photos, had remained completely undeveloped. To be honest, I don't even know a single person who has ever been there. I had a feeling like its existence was simply ignored by everyone, and most of the travelers preferred more developed forest lakes. Having studied the maps, we found the place where the dirt road was closest to the lake. It was a little more than a kilometer to walk from there. A mere trifle, just 10 minutes. We arrived at the place, but quickly realized that everything was not so rosy. A terrible windfall was heading in the direction we needed. It didn't really upset us because we were going for adventures, and the unfortunate kilometer still seemed like a ridiculous distance that could be overcome even by crawling under the branches. We were limited in time, so after eating in the car, we decided to leave the rest of the food there. By the time we got hungry, we would be back anyway. Taking nothing but our phones, we went off into the thicket of the forest. The day was going just fine. It turned out that the windfall was only near the road. It quickly disappeared and gave way to a spacious, bright forest. Almost everywhere the trees grew exactly in a row. Apparently they were planted after the peat extraction was completed. Chatting along the way, we walked briskly deeper into the forest. The pedometer was already showing 1.5 kilometers, but there was no sign of the lake. It seemed that we had deviated from the straight line. It was not scary, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't skip past the lake and came out of the woods on the opposite side. We tried to determine the location on the phone, but it could not connect to the satellites, and the mobile reception disappeared even by the road. For a second, I felt a little uneasy. I don't know. Maybe some ancient instincts kicked in. I was scared to get lost, freeze at night, or be eaten by wild animals. But I immediately put these thoughts aside. Let me remind you that the diameter of the entire forest was 3 kilometers, and cottages were everywhere around. It made me laugh to think that you might not leave there until nightfall, or that you might encounter a pack of wolves here. Yeah, of course. You're more likely to find an elephant here than a wolf. I also told these soothing thoughts to my girlfriend. By the way, her name is Galia. The last thing I wanted was for her to start worrying. However, there was no lake, and the problem was real. There was even a small altercation between Galia and me. It seemed to me that we had gone too far to the left, and to her that we had gone too far to the right. It was strange that she didn't notice that we were constantly turning to the left. Then we turned to the right, and the situation in the forest started changing. It was clearly getting darker and gloomier. And most importantly, the area became swampy and wet. Great, I said. So we're getting closer to the lake. Periodically, we came across the areas where it was already impossible to pass. We walked around them. At some point, it started to cause discomfort. In fact, we were already walking along a narrow path, to the left and right of which a real swamp began. We could no longer choose where to go. There were only 2 options, forward or backward. But there was also good news. If there was a path, then someone was walking on it. After thinking about going back, we decided that any path in this forest should sooner or later lead to the lake. And indeed, after about 20 minutes of walking, a gap appeared in the trees, and we finally reached our goal. The pedometer showed 4.5 kilometers. The The lake turned out to be very beautiful. Dark brown peat water with neat Russian birches along the banks. All the shores were trampled, and various bottles and packages were periodically found. It seemed like dozens of people came there every day. There was something strange about it all, and a slight, barely perceptible sense of unease began to form. We decided to sit on the shore for 10 minutes and move back. We were way behind schedule and didn't realize how long it might take to get back. During this time, we realized what was wrong. We were already out of the thicket, and it was still dark. Clouds had covered the sky, and the bright spring day now looked like a gloomy, gray twilight. I don't remember the bad weather being broadcast, I thought then. We had a good time on the shore. Only the view of the swamp in the depths of the forest reminded us of the efforts we put on the way here. The strange change in the weather was quickly forgotten, and the mood was gradually improving. However, that rise did not last long. When it was time to go back, our opinions were divided again. I suggested that we follow the same path in the swamp that led us there. Galia saw a much wider and more trampled path and suggested not to take risk. It definitely leads to some village. We need to get out of this strange forest as soon as possible and walk around it, she said. She seemed to have taken our entanglements very personally. I must admit I was angry with myself. For a long time I did not notice, or tried not to notice, that my girl was scared. I hardly comforted her. I didn't want to make this mistake. We were going to the village. We walked along a wide path and it seemed that we should finally calm down. But with every step, the feeling of quiet fear grew stronger. The lake expanse began to give way to trees pressing down from all sides again. In the depths of the forest, fog began to spread. There was an unpleasant smell of decomposition, and the strangest thing was that the path began to narrow and was covered with moss. That was very strange because we were walking towards the village and there should have been more and more signs of civilization. The smell of decomposition increased. It became even darker. The air was musty, dense, and it seemed that even the light of a lantern would not be able to penetrate it. We finally stopped. The last thing that was missing to complete the picture appeared, the feeling that we were being watched from somewhere in the thicket. It wasn't like we didn't want to go further, we just had almost no moral and physical strength. The trail was barely visible and we turned back. We greatly accelerated our pace and tried to distract ourselves with conversations. Unfortunately, we could only talk about one thing. We reasoned. The path disappears as you move away from the lake. The wider and more trampled the path, the more people walk along it. It turns out that there are a lot of people near the lake, but when they move away from it, they disappear somewhere. But that's what we did. We walked part of the way, but turned back. Aren't we taking too long to get back? We stopped again. It wasn't getting any brighter, and the trail had completely disappeared. Did we take a wrong turn? There were only swamps everywhere, and we started looking around in a panic, realizing the most terrible thing. We were completely lost. It was becoming more and more difficult to think rationally. We had to move as soon as possible. The entire forest is 3 kilometers in diameter. We just have to run one way and sooner or later we'll get out, I said. It was time to run, not walk. It seemed to us again that someone was looking at us. We ran away from the terrible eyes. The forest itself seemed to be watching. It doesn't like us and doesn't want us here. Or does it want to? What's scarier? The marshes made it difficult to run in one direction. We had to avoid them through narrow, dry areas, after which we were no longer sure that we were heading in the same direction. Galia was exhausted, and we slowed down to walk again. It was already 7 o'clock. It started getting dark, the real twilight. We were already late for the theater. The pedometer showed 10 kilometers. Another hour passed. It seemed to us that this was not the first time we had passed through some places. At that moment I got really scared. We won't be able to leave the forest until it's dark. Galia completely closed herself off from me, hardly spoke, and her eyes became wet from time to time. She was completely exhausted. It seemed that I needed to pull myself together and look for a place to spend the night. There was almost nothing to be seen. We reached a dense spruce forest. My plan was to break more branches and cover the ground and myself with it. It was getting really cold, and it was even colder from hunger. Grabbing a fir branch, I stopped. I really didn't want to make loud noises because the crunch of wood is known to be heard very far away. I looked at Galia. She was leaning on a tree stump and shaking. There was no choice. I started breaking branches, and a few minutes later, I heard strange noises in the depths of the swamps. It seemed like a crunch, but it was the crunch of footsteps. It seemed to me that it appeared when I started making noises and disappeared as I stopped moving. Could it be an echo? It was strange. We haven't heard an echo here before. It looked like someone was walking through the woods, trying to move the same way as I did in order to remain unnoticed. These thoughts brought me to the brink of a panic attack again, but I was able to pull myself together. It was an echo. Yes, it was an echo. I picked more than enough spruce branches and made us an improvised bed. I tried to ask Galia if she had heard any sounds other than mine. She said that she hadn't. Good. We could see almost nothing. The darkness was thick. I insisted that the bed should be placed deeper in the spruce forest to save the heat. Of course, I wanted to make our overnight stay as invisible as possible. We lay down right under the trees and covered ourselves. Galia immediately turned away. I realized that she was quietly crying. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I didn't recognize the place where we were. Instead of thick darkness, there was bright moonlight. It hardly penetrated under our trees. I chose the right place. I wanted to go to pee, but at the same moment I heard the crunching of branches 50 meters away. They were footsteps, and this time they were unmistakable. I could make out a silhouette in the moonlight. It was a man of medium height, slouchy, dressed in a torn fur coat. His hair was long and terribly matted. He was mumbling to himself, and it was clear from his voice that he wasn't young. His movements were no less strange than his appearance. He was moving jerkily, then almost froze in place for half a minute. He seemed to be looking for something on the ground. The old man was gradually approaching us. He was already 10 meters away from us and was standing by the stump where Galia was sitting in the evening. The old man stared at that stump and rushed towards it with his usual jerky movements. When he began to sniff the ground around the stump, I thought I would faint. It seemed that he sensed our presence. After a couple of moments, he began tearing off the bark from the stump and eating it. To be honest, I was shocked, but luckily it seemed that he still didn't know that we were here. The last thing we wanted was meeting a madman. Having finished his meal, the man went back calmly. Strangely, the feeling that the forest was watching everything that was happening returned to me. After walking a few meters, the old man leaned against an old birch tree and spoke again. The voice was louder, more confident, but I still couldn't make out a word. At that moment, I heard two new sounds, and neither of them made me happy. Firstly, Galia started moving. The old man's speech was so loud that she woke up. I quickly covered her mouth with my hand and told her to keep quiet. The second sound was new footsteps, but they clearly belonged to something on 4 legs. Great. Does this bum have a dog? But it would be better if it was a dog. From somewhere in the spruce forest, not so far from us, a woman jumped out. She was running on 4 legs and leaning on the ground from behind, not with her knees, but with her feet, like animals do. She was also dressed in rags, disheveled, looked just terrifying, and made strange noises similar to growling. Galia lost consciousness from fear. Passing by the stump, the woman stopped for a second, as if she felt something too. But when she saw the man, she went in his direction. They obviously knew each other and suddenly started a conversation. I couldn't believe my ears or my eyes, but gradually I began to understand their strange muttering. It was Russian, but with an admixture of some gurgling, clicking sounds and an animal growl. After a few minutes, I began to distinguish the words. They said something about bark, mushrooms, and the lake, as if it was a simple everyday chatter. But then I clearly made out 2 words: strangers and guests. My heart almost stopped beating. I was sure it was about Galia and me. Speaking of this, those two almost lowered their voices to a whisper, as if they didn't want to be heard. At that moment, they looked like two gossips discussing someone or something that shouldn't be discussed. It looked like they were a little afraid to talk about it. It seemed to me that I had adapted to their speech and began to understand the essence of the conversation. They said that the guests would disappear here, that not a single guest had left this forest yet if he was noticed, and that they feel very sorry for the guests. The last part shocked me. I couldn't imagine who this strange couple was, but the phrase about pity turned everything upside down. A crazy thought popped into my head. Maybe we're hiding for nothing. They obviously know about our presence here. If not a single guest came out of the forest, then we don't have much of a chance either. But the danger doesn't seem to come from these two. And they clearly have compassion for us and may be able to help. I began waking Galia up. We had to make one of the most difficult decisions of our lives. Should I wait until morning and try to get out of the forest? Or should I believe in the conversation I heard and trust these strange creatures? We decided to watch them a little more, since they were sitting very close by. There wasn't much to see in the moonlight. We saw that their skin was pale. Their gaze, like their speech, was a bit wild, animalistic. But like animals, they had some kind of silent, deep understanding of life. They weren't like us, but we certainly didn't feel any danger in them. I took a deep breath and spoke. "Good night." I had no idea how to start such a conversation at all. The old man and the woman squeaked in horror and quickly backed away. I told Galia to lie down and keep quiet in case our plan didn't work out. I got lost in the forest and I now can't get out. Can you help me? People looked at me with utter horror. They seemed to be more afraid of me than I was of them. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to get out of the woods." Having said that, I smiled kindly, trying not to show my fear. After a long pause, the old man spoke. It was obvious that he was making great efforts for me to understand him better. "Yes, we will help you. Let's go. We must hurry." Quiet. I believed him. Delighted, I called Galia. This scared them again. The old man said to follow him, and the woman was crawling behind us. I discerned more and more simple, familiar emotions in these strange people. We walked in silence along the paths in the swamps, winding from side to side. At some point, the old man broke the silence, saying that until he gave the signal, it was necessarily to walk extremely quietly. At that moment, we were just passing by the lake, and a startling picture appeared before us. The lake seemed to be bubbling. There was a lot of life in it. There were a lot of people around it. They were all feral with pale skin, just like our friends. We saw many people who were just sitting and looking at the water. Some of them, at first glance, were more aggressive. In their voices, the animal growl prevailed over other sounds. It seemed that our new friends were very afraid that we would be noticed. But we got lucky. Soon the lake began to disappear behind the trees. The last thing I saw was one of the savages immersing himself in water and disappearing. When the lake disappeared from view, our guides relaxed a little. Seeing how surprised we were, the old man decided to tell the story of this place. I will not try to convey his speech directly. I did not understand him well. But here was the point. When there were peat mines here, a lot of people worked on them. Many families lived in temporary buildings. The parents worked all day. The children went to school in the nearest village. But gradually it became obvious that living close to the swamp had a bad effect on people. Whether it was the swamp gases or the general atmosphere of alienation, people started losing their minds. Many of them became aggressive. There were fights, and sometimes even murders. Missing people have become a common thing. Some were found drowned in a quagmire. Others were never found. The workers began to call the forest the Dead Marshes. As a result, it was decided to curtail the development. When the entire staff was taken out of the forest, more than 30 people were missing. Most of these people were alive, but their psyche had already been completely broken. They were sure that the swamp was their home, and they had no intention of leaving. They found air pockets in the lake formed in the development center. You had to dive into the water, swim to the bottom, and from there you could swim under the shore. In the air pockets under the shore they lived. Their children were born and grew up there. They normally buried the dead ones in a swamp. Our rescuers were already the third generation of swamp people. They ate whatever they had to: bark, fish, mushrooms, silt. They went outside only at night, realizing that if someone found out about them, their quiet life would come to an end. Unfortunately, I did not ask how they survive in winter. I tried not to ask unnecessary questions. I asked only one question: why they didn't want the others to see us. The answer was something like this: you are not the first guests who had to spend the night here, and not the first to ask for help. But you're the first to come out of the woods after that. You're lucky to have met us. It is impossible to convey the joy and relief that we felt when we came out of the forest into a spacious field. By that time, it was already beginning to get light. We warmly thanked our rescuers and gave them all the mushrooms that we had collected. They were overjoyed. They asked me not to tell this story to anyone. I don't think I broke my promise because I never mentioned exactly where these events took place. Galia's phone was able to determine our location. We were on the opposite side of the forest from our car. It took several hours to get there. We discussed the whole story on the way. We decided that it was really the marsh gases that almost drove us crazy last night. Apparently, the dead marshes are really alive, and their soul is this gas. You're either smart enough to leave as soon as possible, or the swamps win and you stay here forever.